All right. I hope the sound is clear. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Simo. I'm a technical coach at Makers Academy. And today, this January 2022 cohort, which is our fourth ever DevOps cohort, has finished their course. So around 8 weeks ago, Anna, Jess, Hotu, Abdur, Leo, Daniel, and Jack started their DevOps journey at Makers. And I've been their coach for all but one of those weeks. And I'm really proud to see all the progress they've made since they started with me on day one. So throughout those 8 weeks, they worked in teams to tackle different projects that exposed them to the cloud, mainly AWS, to how DevOps fits into the software development lifecycle, to the tooling that DevOps engineers use every day, to the DevOps mindset, and of course, to the kinds of problems that they will be likely to encounter in their careers as DevOps engineers. So they started out by building a solid foundation around containers and building CI/CD pipelines. And then in the weeks that followed, those topics kept coming up in new forms as they set up more and more complex projects. So they fought some hard battles against Jenkins and AWS Code Deploy, but came out victorious in the end. They learned to appreciate infrastructure as code and Terraform after we put them through the pain of setting up a bunch of stuff manually for the first few weeks. They deployed a containerized web app to Azure and puzzled about when in the process to best run database migrations. They made their first steps in the world of Kubernetes and also got an idea of the many security risks application can face and some strategies to mitigate them. And then, which is the topic of today mainly, came the final boss, which was a final 2-week project where they got to put their site reliability engineer hats on and improve the reliability of an existing system and also handle various unlucky events that happened to that system throughout the 2 weeks. So what's been most exciting for me to see is for this cohort in particular is that they regularly stretched and tested the limits of our curriculum. So they've been giving me a lot of ideas for how we can make it even better going forward. So thank you, January 22, for that. Let's get to the presentations. So today we have 2 teams presenting. After each presentation, there will be the chance to ask a few questions. So remember your questions and then you can either pop them in a chat or ask by raising your hand. You can also ask me questions about Makers if you have any. So here we go. Our first team of the afternoon is Team Typo.
Hi, we are Team Typo, and we're going to talk to you about our approach to increasing reliability to your critical system. A little bit of background on our team name. At the beginning of the project, we made a typo, and not only did we decide to keep it and continue to use it, we eventually decided to call ourselves Team Typo. I guess just to remind ourselves to double check what we write. Next slide, please. These past 2 weeks, we've been working on a reliability project. We were asked by a veterinary hospital to increase reliability in their medical system. The system should allow staff to access the hospital database, register and update patients, create, update and delete notes, and register staff. Reliability was 97%, security was insufficient, and we were getting plenty of 500 errors. We also only had access to the load balancer and the API documentation. So 3% of the traffic was failing, and with the increase in traffic, the reliability dropped down to roughly to 5-6%. And in terms of security, the application used HTTP basic authorization over HTTPS. Next slide. Overall objective was to make improvements to a critical system while also keeping it highly available. We had to preserve functionality, increase reliability, and ensure no security breaches. We also had to try and implement some improvements to the system. The system should respond to 99% of user requests successfully over the duration of the project, and we should not have any breaches in the meantime. Next slide. On a personal level, we all focused on learning as much as possible from this experience rather than progressing quickly through the project. And during the bootcamp, we had the chance to get acquainted and practice many DevOps concepts. We learned about Docker, Jenkins, GitHub Actions, AWS services, Kubernetes, and more. This gave us a vast array of potential tools to use for this project. We got to practice more and hone in some of the skills we have acquired in the previous 6 weeks of the bootcamp. And now I'm going to pass it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Anna. First, we wanted to gain visibility, so we added logging to our load balancer. Amazon Athena allows us to use SQL queries to filter the logs. Based on the logs, we saw two main topics we need to improve. We had many failing requests, so we launched AGI proxy as a reverse proxy to retry all retriable errors. During this part, we used Terraform to create infrastructure, GitHub action for CI/CD pipeline, and Docker and ECR to deploy on our EC2 instance. Another main issue was security. On the logs, we can see malicious attacks. We attach the web application firewall to our load balancer and implement security rules to prevent access from outside the hospital. Those 2 weeks, we had different events to model the real-world environment. To deal with the traffic increase, we scaled AGI proxy, increased timeout, and implement limited caching to our infrastructure. We implemented Redis cluster on AWS Elastic Cache. The biggest event was to host bankrupted and the promise of source code disappears. We need to make our backend API server. We used Java and Spring to the server and launched on Elastic Beanstalk. We autoscaled our backend server too. Retrieve credentials from the caching and use Postman for testing and debugging. Now I hand it over to Jess, who will talk more about our solution.
Thanks, Daniel. So as you can see, this is a diagram of our final implementation, which shows all the tools we ended up using. The next thing to think about was what we would have liked to have achieved if we had more time. One of the things which we all would have loved to have finished would have been importing one of our backups from our Redis cache into our new database. We could have then used the Strangler fig pattern to retire the host server completely. Currently, the cache is implemented via a Node app. So instead, by incorporating that cache into our Spring app, we could optimize further and be finished with a single scaled Elastic Beanstalk app with a caching layer and a database layer. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to speak about our approach to the project. So one of the things that we really focused on implementing was a rotating Scrum Master, someone to take charge each day and hold morning stand-ups and evening retros using Miro. The stand-ups were really useful for reminding us of the progress we had already made and helping to plan and structure our day, and also allowed everyone to be on the same page and to have an equal say on what we should be doing. The retros, once again, allowed us to reflect on our progress, but this time a bit more deeply. We also found that on the days where we had run into a frustrating blocker, we could still think about all the other achievements we had made that day. Due to the nature of the project, we mainly worked in a mobbing style, taking turns as drivers and navigators. We thought this would allow us all to gain an equal understanding of what we were doing, and we created tickets in our Trello together, so we were all aware of where we were at in the project and where we were going and why. At the beginning of the project, we had all discussed our personal goals. Some of the common themes included learning over progress, a blameless and safe environment, and having fun. And I personally think that we managed to achieve all of those, leading to a great team dynamic and a really enjoyable, if stressful, final 2 weeks. Finally, I'll pass you on to Jack.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, so that leaves me to cover a few of the highlights and challenges from the last 2 weeks. So starting with the challenges. Our first major blip, you can see in the screenshot there on the top right if you squint. We'd implemented AWS WAF recommended security rules. This was basically, despite having a week focused on security, it's such a huge topic that we felt that AWS knew better. However, as you can see here, traffic spikes significantly and IP flood prevention kicks in and prevents our hospital from being able to contact the back end. And we did quickly disable this. It still took a hit on our traffic, but yeah, it made us realize that we needed to have a bit of a smarter approach to these rules, investigate them regardless of them being an AWS recommendation. Our next significant issue was the craft show this Tuesday. So at the show, there was a spoiled batch of dog food, which caused a huge traffic spike. Our mitigations in the moment, increased timeouts, balancing load across more proxies, wasn't making significant impact. We raced to get Elastic Cache successfully implemented, and that resulted in our response times plummeting, which you can see there in that bottom right graph. Okay, next. Our second minor setback was in relation to using cluster orchestration tools. We implemented an EKS cluster and deployed a wrap there. However, despite successfully having it all going, project limitations meant we weren't unable to use it as a tool. This taught us a lot about flexibility and reevaluating our goals throughout the project. moving on to our highlights. Teamwork's been great. Pretty much the entirety of our 2-week project, we've been on a call all day to each other, able to solve problems quickly and really enjoy the process of working together. We've all been a little bit glued to control panel throughout these 2 weeks. And I think one of the things we're proudest of is, obtaining the overall target, which is that all-time 99% score. What we've learned from the project, which is the next slide. Cool. So we've learned a lot about different key technologies. I've put a few there. And we've also learned a confidence that if these aren't the tools we're exactly using, we'll be able to pick up new ones and sort of run with them. Tied into that, one of the big things we'll take away from this project is staying flexible and resilient. Different events taking place over the 2 weeks, things from fault finding to what we were focusing on or expecting to build was changing all the time. This meant that we had to stay focused on the current event and make sure that our previous plans fit that. And I think that should tide us well. And without wanting to seem too cheesy, being able to have a really strong team you can rely on and support and be supported by, it's a really powerful tool in achieving goals and targets. And finally, another key takeaway is gratitude for this learning opportunity from our employers and from makers. And that is us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Team Typo. I loved all the memes. All right, so it's time for questions. We have like 5 minutes maybe. You can raise your hand with the reaction, the Zoom reaction, or you can type in the chat. And this can be a question about the presentation or anything else about the whole journey that they went through. Anything really? Zeno?
Yeah, my question for the team is, what do you think was the most challenging aspect of working on this project? And also, what was your highlight? But yeah, really well done to the team. It was really cool.
I guess I could take it. I think it's probably just the changing events. So when you think that, all right, this is the plan, you get a little joker message pop up from Simo and it's, all right, the plan's off, we need a new plan. And I think having that flexibility was probably the toughest part. I guess in the real world that probably mimics what can actually happen, and having to come up with fresh plans.
What about the highlights?
For the highlight, I think we've mentioned it quite a lot, but definitely the teamwork. We had a really great 2 weeks, even though it's quite stressful. We supported each other a lot, and also we communicated with the other team, and we shared knowledge between teams, which I think was really important.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was. I mean, you really. I hit you with some of the hard events that can be played in that scenario. So and you dealt with them pretty well. So I was really impressed too. Anyone else with a question?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. What was the thing that for a start as well? I would just say that I really like. So I do DevOps at EY, and I thought that whole scenario and everything was really good. I think DevOps is something that's pretty hard to learn. It's pretty hard to necessarily find a coherent course which captures all the different components to it. So I think I really like the look of that. But yeah, guys, what was something that, what was your biggest regret, I guess? Something that you wished you'd done differently, or a mistake you feel, what was one of your biggest mistakes you felt you learned from?
I guess us trusting the vendor to give us the code base. I think we should have kind of prepared for that, because in the end we didn't end up getting the code base at all. So maybe in hindsight we should have started building our own API server like a lot earlier, and that would have got us further a lot quicker as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I can tell you now, I'm always making mistakes in DevOps still, and that's the best way to learn. So yeah, all good.
Great. Maybe one more question, if there is one. All right, cool. In that case, oh, I also saw something about someone asking about hoping to see a recording. Normally these recordings get uploaded to YouTube, so I think you'll be able to see it. Sorry about the sound issues. Okay, it's time for our second team, Team LaGuardia.
Okay, so I'm going to start off introducing the Team 2's reliability project. The team comprised myself, Leo, and also Hotu and Abda. You're going to be familiar with the scenario, but I want to talk through it. So we had the veterinary hospitals database server, was queried using API calls. It had reliability problems, and also there were some features missing which the owners would like to implement. As a team, we had no current access to it besides the load balancer, and we had no access credentials for the API, so we couldn't query the server directly ourselves. The custom requirements in this were that we preserved functionality throughout the project, improve reliability, and implement some improvements. And the targets they gave us were to achieve a success rate of 99% and also have no security breaches during the project. For our initial planning, we identified two key aims to start the project. One was to get as much observability as we could on the current service. The purpose was for us to identify potential strategies that we might implement to improve reliability, as we were unsure about this, and also look for obvious security flaws within the system that we could fix early on to improve security. The second aim that we identified was we wanted to set up a proxy server that we could insert in the system. This was a bit more of a long-term aim, but we figured this would have two advantages. Firstly, it would allow us to intercept data between the load balance and the legacy server, as we didn't have access, which would give us further observability on what was happening with the requests and the responses.
Handyman, who I think you might have met, maybe at one point. He should.
Responses through the system, thank you. And also, we were beginning to perceive that some of the best solutions for this server might be actually to replace it. If we have an existing server on unknown technology with reliability problems, it would seem sensible to begin planning for its either taking some services off it or replacing it completely. While discussing this planning, we considered aspects like CI/CD pipelines where they might be appropriate in the project, containerization as a tool, what tools we might use for digesting the logs. As early on, we began to access logs from the load balancer to begin to investigate the problem as part of the planning. And we also considered auto scaling and adding HTTPS as a kind of priority to improve security and encryption into the system. So I'm going to pass to Hotu now, who'll talk about how we began to tackle those challenges.
Cool. First thing was we had no visibility. So we set up Athena just to get an idea of what's happening, what kind of requests are being made, where things are failing. If you just want to go to the next slide, I think it is. Yeah. No. Yeah. So blocked quite a few malicious calls, and yeah, that was that for that part. So we decided to have two proxies, one short-term, which was just to retry the retriable errors, the 500 errors that we're getting. And we used the HA proxy to do that. And that pretty much instantly solved most of our problems, which was great. And then I'll let Abdu talk a little bit about the long-term one.
Yeah, so with the HA proxy in place, we kind of like wanted to insert on the wanted to make a proxy from the scratch, which kind of fits into the whole story about trying to make sure that if we need to replace a server, we would have some structure there. We decided to go with the Express. We made CD pipelines with GitHub Actions and code deploy, because we were extensively, for first few days, we were extensively looking at the logs and going through them. We kind of realized there was one of the path which was pretty much risk-free in terms of experimenting with it with our own proxy. So we decided to go through just use that one path and use extensive logging through PM2. That kind of also allow us to see it's sort of like the different authentications going through, so we can actually scrape off authentications because we didn't really have access to the legacy system. So we can use one of the authentication to kind of experiment with it, that how it's actually working and how it's behaving, and sort of in effort to make it resemble as in terms of performance resemble as it is for the HA proxy. We used a sort of like a second backup proxy and kind of deployed both of as the same code. And this is how sort of like our overall skeleton of how our structure looked like. You can see that there was only one entry point. We pretty much closed our internal proxies from the outside, so it only received from load balancer. And you can see that the calls are actually going through load balancer to our proxies, which are sort of directed to the legacy server and back, so we can actually see the whole behavior of all the systems. And the next slide, please. So yeah, we kind of wanted to make sure that we don't mess up with the features, and kind of our reliabilities remain same. We extensively focused on testing as well. So we were once we are designing the proxy, we were testing it from a local host, then we were putting it onto the EC2 instance, and then curling it from our local machines before we actually put into live traffic. And then we slightly started putting small amount of traffic onto through it, so we can actually see what kind of data is being trafficked, how can we scrape it to make sure we can actually build our own in case we need it. And this allows us to do it quite successfully. From that, I'll pass it back to Huto.
Cool. Yeah, so we implemented the Figma Strangler, well, part of it. So we created DynamoDB, scraped some data from the request and populated our database with users based on the requests that they were making. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Added some middleware to authenticate against non-users, obviously. Yeah, and we did this all through the hospitals route, which was just a get request. If you want to go to the next slide, here's our part of our database populated, which is nice. Pretty proud of that. Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. And that's back to Leo.
So this is the point we'd reached at the end of the project, was having a route being served by our proxy server and beginning to access and scrape data for the other routes and build the other route functionality. In terms of the achievements and these outcomes of the project against the customer requirements, we're listing them as follows. So in terms of functionality, reliability never fell below 95% for a daily figure. In terms of security, we improved the firewall to block some malicious attacks and isolated the legacy server and proxies from the wider internet using security groups within the AWS system. We also added an HTTPS route for clients to use to the load balancer to look to improve security in the future. We managed to improve reliability to pretty much above 99% after day 5 using the retrying of 500 errors. And the Figma Strangler replacement pattern was getting to a point where we built the solid foundation, we're ready to begin transferring the rest of the routes across. And that, even in itself, would be expected to reduce the load on the legacy server and improve things. In terms of the customer requested improvements, we added the HTTPS route, and we also managed to solve a problem with notes when they're created, is that the staff would enter the ID number of the creating staff, and we had the system replace that so that IDs couldn't be spoofed either in error or maliciously. Where we felt we could have improved in the project, we did have one short total outage of 1 to 3 minutes, which was an error. We considered adding alarm to key metrics, but didn't find the time to investigate that fully or implement it. And we also were not successful in responding to the latency issues caused by the heavy load of the Crufts dog show in week 2. Further to that, in terms of reliability, we're not fully ready at this point after 2 weeks for a complete shutdown or failure of the previous server. If it went down, we might maintain some, but not all services. And we haven't implemented auto scaling on our solution as yet. In terms of security, there is some unsatisfactory elements. The password and the data databases are not currently encrypted, so that's an obvious security flaw. And the firewall is probably still quite crude in terms of what it does. In terms of improvements, we were not successful, did not manage to implement image storage as requested by the customer. So I'm going to open up if there are any questions for the team.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions? And you ended on a bit of a down note there, but the reason you even got so far was that you managed to improve reliability too well at the start, and so I had to escalate it.
It's Rob here. I've got a question. I've not heard of Figma Strangler before. Can someone explain what that is? What's the principle there?
Would Hoto or Abdul, would you like to, or shall I?
You can do it.
Okay, so the Figma Strangler pattern, we'll introduce the concept or that term, if you like, for it. But the principle is essentially about, if you want to replace an existing live service, is how do you do that without disrupting it? And it relies on you abstracting the system in some way, putting a facade in front of it that you can then control the inputs and to it. And as you start building its replacement, you can slowly start shifting gradually parts of the system across to the new one until it's completely replaced. So strangling the old system, if you like, slowly replacing it with something that behaves and looks like it's to the outside, because the facade hides what's going on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leah. Good job, guys.
Yeah, I think maybe a more common name is Strangler Fig pattern, but I'd also not heard of it that much before encountering it as part of this course.
Yes, it refers to fig trees, which slowly strangle trees and kill them, but they leave a shell of the fig tree around the old tree once it's rotted away.
Ah, I didn't know that. Cool. Anyone else with a question? Oh, there's something in the chat. Some congratulations in the chat.
If I can give like a example of in the context of our own. So once we managed to scrape off all the data regarding to hospitals, and because there were no more hospitals being created or anything, we, instead of sending it to the legacy system, we were just delivering it through our own database, which was a lot quicker. So we managed to isolate one part. Now you go on to the next part. Now you go on to the next part. So I think that's what was my understanding of Figma Strangler.
Strangler Fig.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Abdul. You were on the way there. So I have a question. Maybe nobody else has a question right now. Leo, you went.
There's a question in chat from Natalie.
Oh, there is. Well, Natalie, that's not a question, right? So good to see you have clarity. Well, so far, no questions, but I have one. So you know how in software development at Makers, in the software development course, we teach a debugging method or process, really. And a lot of the course is about being able to apply that well. So, for example, getting visibility, tightening the loop. And I was wondering whether now in the DevOps course, nature of the work being a little different, whether you've had to acquire new processes, whether you feel like you've learned new processes, or maybe refine the processes you already had. It's a bit of an open question for anyone, actually any of the two teams.
I guess I can say one thing. One of the difference is that because with DevOps, there's a lot of, you're not going in depth of one thing, and you're kind of like covering a breadth of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that would be unknowns, whereas in this case, you can sort of just cover your bases and just try it. So that was like a change of approach, at least for me, and I believe for my team as well, that once we sort of like discussed it, talked about security issues, and cover all bases, even though we didn't know it, we just tried it.
Thanks. Does anyone else have something to add there?
So the question was about different processes from the DevOps to the software development.
Yeah, just you've had to deal with the different types of challenges, and I was wondering whether you feel like you acquired new ways of dealing with those that you didn't have before the software development part of the course.
I think in some ways, the nature of the projects, it was kind of almost a bit more research-based in some way and thought-based, less implementation and more strategy identification, and then applying the tools rather than the kind of development where you're down in the detail, I guess, of the coding as one difference.
Jack?
Yeah, I'd say that I think in the early phase of the software dev course, there was kind of quite a lot of moments of not knowing where to go and sort of like having so much to do. And I think in those moments where we have to sort of learn to find solutions, those sort of skills are the things which I think we've been able to strengthen as we've gone on through that course and then into this course, where I guess a lot of it is being able to Google things and being better at Googling things, and then knowing when you've Googled something and it's not giving you the right answer, and to keep Googling almost, and just to keep searching for knowledge and to ask for help and to rely on your team and all those sorts of things. So I don't think I would have had those skills pre-September.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more research, and the projects are laid out in such a way that you have to do a lot of research. Got some complaints about the AWS documentation not being as clear as we want it to be, but that's part of the job as well to deal with that. Does anyone else in the audience have a question to any of the two teams really, or to me?
Hi, it's Graham. Probably on the back of your comment there. Between the software development and the DevOps SRE, did you find any differences in terms of prioritization of the work?
I guess one difference was when you're developing like a lot of it is you're coding, and you're coding in a very sort of like a limited environment. You can try a lot of different things, so you can just so there's always sort of like felt like there's a safety net when you're developing. Nothing can go wrong, whereas when we were working with this, we were the safety net in sort of like that context. So that was like a different way of sort of different can't lost the word at the moment. Yeah, this was like one thing which kind of like starkly different from the way of it, or the mindset of it. So you have to sort of like strategize a lot more before you actually can start implementing and kind of come up with different sort of solutions, because there's a whole lot of different services and different combination of services. What are the advantages of that? What is the security issues? Because in development, we were not thinking about security issues almost at all. Whereas in this case, we were constantly talking about how this thing will impact our security or our reliability.
Slightly different mindset. Yeah, great. Slightly different mindset. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Leo, you also had your hand up briefly. Maybe you wanted to add something.
I think Abda captured really what's one of the key differences. There's a lot more mobbing approach on this, because when you're working on software development, you're quite clear, kind of often in quite narrow tasks and going down into tickets, which are about building a specific bit of logic. But here we were making choices. And one of the biggest challenge was for us was almost awareness of what was possible, particularly in this last project, is that a lot of these concepts are kind of new to us, and things like proxy servers. And when you start thinking about that, you start thinking, well, what's possible with this? And it's only then when you do that and start looking, you discover the tools that might implement these possibilities. And then you start choosing, well, what tool's right for the context? What can we access now? And then you have to learn how to deploy that tool. So it's more of an exploration, I think, than the software development.
Oh, yeah, you summarized that really well. Never thought of it in those terms. But yeah, I guess that's sort of what I was talking about at the beginning of the course. Maybe you'll learn about thinking of trade-offs and disadvantages and advantages. I remember in one of our early workshops, Batu asked me, is there always a disadvantage to any solution? And I said, most of the time there will be. Nothing only has advantages. All right, there's something in chat. Ah, that was Jack. Cool. Maybe one last question, or any messages to the teams?
Simo, is it okay if I just introduce myself really quickly?
Sure.
So yeah, I realized I mentioned something in the chat, and a couple of you probably don't know who I am yet. I think I've spoken to a few of you on Slack, but there's a few people from this cohort that I'm going to be working with as their placement coaches. So I'm with Leo, Abdur, Daniel, and Anna Maria. So I just wanted to come and stalk you on your demo day to see what you've been working on. And I am not from a technical background at all. I used to be an English teacher to secondary age students. And so to see the kind of work that you guys are doing is mind-blowing and a little bit intimidating, if I'm going to be truthful. But yeah, seriously, well done. It's an incredible amount of work. Simo, would you mind just confirming, how long did the guys have to work on these projects?
So this final project was a 2-week one, and all the other projects were 1-week projects, and in total 8 weeks. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well done, everyone. I'm going to stay on the call and yeah, mute myself and stop my video. And yeah, I'll be here in the background lurking.
Thank you, Natalie. All right. So if there are no more questions or thoughts, then I want to thank you all for joining us today for the culmination of January 22's DevOps journey, and have a good rest of the afternoon. And that's it from us. Thank you. Bye. Take care.
See you.
Well done, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Well done.
All right.